Hello, and welcome to the CircuitPython Weekly for August 31st, 2020. This is the time of the week that we get together to talk about all things CircuitPython. I'm Katney, and I'm sponsored by Adafruit to work on CircuitPython. CircuitPython is a version of Python designed to run on tiny computers called microcontrollers. CircuitPython development is sponsored by Adafruit, so please support them by purchasing hardware from adafruit.com. This meeting is hosted on the Adafruit Discord server. You can join at any time by going to adafru.it/discord. We hold the meeting in the CircuitPython text channel and the CircuitPython voice channel. This meeting typically happens on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, except when it coincides with a US holiday. If the meeting is changed, we'll notify you via Discord. There's also a calendar available that we try to keep updated, so you can subscribe to that as well. This meeting is recorded. We record the audio from the voice channel and video of the text channel. If you'd rather not have your voice recorded, you're still welcome to participate. You would put your notes in the notes document, or you can type into the text channel. Either way, I will read them off. Note that the next meeting will be on CircuitPython Day, which is Wednesday, September 9th. Not September 7th following the regular schedule, or the 8th like our usual holiday policy. We decided that since it was going to be bumped anyway, we would hold it on CircuitPython Day, so it will be on Wednesday next week. The video of the meeting will be posted to YouTube. The audio is released as a podcast. If you find that this podcast is not available on your favorite podcast service, please let us know. There is a notes doc to accompany the meeting and the recording. Like I said, if you wish to participate but you don't have a mic or you don't want your voice recorded, you can add your updates to the notes document and we'll read them off when we get to you. And if you wish to participate but you can't make it to the meeting, you can also leave hug reports and status updates in the notes and let us know that you're missing the meeting, and I will read them off as I get to them. The notes document also contains timestamps to go along with the video, so you can use the document to skip around and view the video parts that are most interesting to you. If you're just listening in, please let us know you're lurking and we will skip over you. If possible, add your name to the notes doc with lurking after it. It's important that your lurking status is in the notes, because that's kind of what we use to go through everybody on the list in the meeting. If you wish to speak in the meeting, you need to be added to the CircuitPythonistas role on Discord. Please ask anyone in the meeting who is an admin or moderator to add you to the role if you're not already a member. If you don't want to be added to the role, you can still participate text only. Simply let us know. And the CircuitPythonistas is who we notify with changes in the meeting. So that role also has the added benefit of you knowing if there's any changes to the meeting. The meeting is held in 5 parts. The first part is community news. This is a look at all things CircuitPython and Python on hardware in the community. It's a preview of our Python for Microcontrollers newsletter. The second part is state of CircuitPython libraries and Blinka. This is a statistical overview of the entire project, and it's a chance to look at the project by the numbers instead of sort of separate from what we're doing, but just to get a general understanding of the health of the project. The third part is hug reports. Hug reports is an opportunity to highlight good things folks are doing, take the time to recognize the awesome folks in our community. This section is held as a round robin, where we'll start with the person who's hosting, so I will start, and then I'll go through the list alphabetically, looping back to the top, and give everyone who wants to a chance to participate. If you're lurking, I'll skip over you. If you are text only or missing the meeting, I will read your notes when I get to you in the list. The fourth part is status updates, which is an opportunity to sync up on what we've been up to over the last week since the last meeting, and what we will be up to over the next, well, this time week and a half until the next meeting. It's also an opportunity for folks to provide tips and tricks in response to other people's updates. It is also held as a round robin, same as hug reports. And the fifth part is In the Weeds. In the Weeds is an opportunity for more long-form open discussions. These discussions can come out of status updates or be something you've identified ahead of time as too long for status updates. If you have an In the Weeds topic now, please add it to the notes doc along with your name in the weeds section at the end of the document. If you think of them during the meeting, please add them as soon as you come up with them. Basically what we're trying to avoid is waiting around to see if anybody has any in the weeds topics once we reach the end. And if you're text only, please make a note of it so I can read it off. And that is how the meeting goes. So first, let's take a time code. And then we'll start with community news. So CircuitPython Day is in 1 week. September 9th, 2020 is CircuitPython Day. Adafruit has chosen September 9th, 2020 as the snakiest day of this year for CircuitPython Day. Much more to come on events and happenings, to include a CircuitPython team livestream, collaboration with hardware and software folks, and highlighting all things Python and Python on hardware. As part of that, we have Dia CircuitPython. CircuitPython fans in Central America are planning additional activities. This is a quote. It is Costa Rican artist Isabel Utag has been commissioned to create a mascot for us for this event, taking into account our roots and culture as Central Americans. You may already know Blinka, the snake mascot Adafruit has chosen for CircuitPython. With his talent, he has created us one who we are sure will be loved by all. I present to you Quetzal Blinka. And you can see their website, which is in Spanish, for their planned activities. One for sure I know of is we're doing a special edition Spanish-speaking show and tell, which should be interesting. So that's one of the events, and I know they have events planned all day that they'll be doing as well. So this year we've dedicated CircuitPython Day to Lambo Labs Makerspace, who are helping with the Beirut disaster. They were not affected, well, they were affected, but in the grand scheme of things, not very much as a group, and so they've been putting all their efforts into helping those who are deeply affected. More information on CircuitPython Day is forthcoming. Ideas? Do you have any ideas or suggestions or events you would like to host and so on? Send them to CircuitPythonDay@adafruit.com, or you can add your event to the working calendar, which is on GitHub. All right. Next up, the Born Hack Badge. The Born Hack Hacker Camp still happened this year, and they once again provided an electronic badge to all attendees. Similar to the last couple years, this badge has an ARM Cortex M0 as the main controller, but on this badge, it's the SAMD21 from Microchip, with 4 times as much flash and RAM compared to the chips on previous badges. It makes it possible to run CircuitPython, which lowers the bar for how easy it is to get started hacking on the badge. Next up, the Tiny Touchbook. Or Tiny Book Touch, I guess, if I read it wrong. Joey Castillo posts a Twitter thread about his development of the Tiny Book Touch, a small e-paper reader with screen touch sensing. In bringing it up, he wrote a demo in CircuitPython with the Adafruit Focal Touch library, and he says it just worked. This device includes stemma ports, GPIO, and I2C. He also posts, so I'm realizing I need to redesign as a featherboard, either SAMD51J or ESP32S2. Imagine using this with a LoRa wing for radio stuff or controlling a power relay. So many options, and if I can keep it simple, maybe this is a gadget that I could look into having manufactured. All right, next up is Garden Pi. Powered by Neptune.py, this is designed to manage, monitor, and control a series of sprinkler valves and a multitude of sensors for pretty much any sized irrigation, hydroponic, aquaponic project. It can be scaled from 1 to 32 zones for water and 7 zones for power. It is built almost entirely in Python 3 and on the Raspberry Pi 4. The code is available on GitHub. There is a getting started with CircuitPython on compatible microcontroller boards guide that is available to get people up and running on CircuitPython, and that's from Woolsey Workshop. So this is basically a preview of the Python for Microcontrollers newsletter. If you'd like to submit your Python on hardware related projects, ideas, or posts, please contact Ann B, or submit a PR to the newsletter repo. The draft for each week is always in this folder, and you can take a look at it if you want to get a sneak peek, or if you want to have something added. That's another way to do it. And that is community news. And yep, you can send it to Anne on Twitter at Ann_engineer is the other good way to get things submitted. So next up is the state of CircuitPython, libraries, and Blinka. First, we'll talk about the project overall, then we'll talk about the core, specifically the libraries, and Adafruit Blinka as well. So first up, overall. So this is, this information includes everything from the core, the libraries, and Blinka. So it just kind of covers everything all at once. So overall, we had 26 pull requests merged by 12 authors. And I don't see any new names there, but thank you to everyone who continues to participate, and 8 reviewers. We had 17 issues closed by 12 people and 18 opened by 15 people. One thing I will note about that is a lot of people. Often the numbers are not so close to the number opened, and it means we've got a lot of people involved in this, and that's really excellent. Like, it's fine that we have one more opened than we did closed, but we have so many people participating. It's excellent. And Jeff points out that Michael Lass is a name that he doesn't recognize. I feel like I recognize them from before, but perhaps I don't. So Michael Lass is a new author, or at least relatively new. So overall, we just released 6.0, I want to say Alpha 3. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, no, I'm not wrong. Excellent. So overall, we just released 6.0 Alpha 3, and everything is moving along. We're really close to releasing a beta, but we wanted to hold off and make sure that we had all of our features and APIs and so on set to go before we move into beta, but we're very close. In terms of the libraries, we had a recent sweep of updates because Pylint updated, and that's how it goes when Pylint updates, and we chose to handle it that way, which means when something like that happens, we have to then go through and test the libraries and make sure that they didn't add any new changes. In this case, they did. So we're still running through some of that, and thank you to Jeff for going through a ton of them to get them up to a good standing in Pylint size. And Blinka just keeps growing. Thanks to Melissa for all the effort put in there. I know every new product we put out and every new demo that we try almost always just runs on Raspberry Pi without any changes, and so that's really excellent, and thank you for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott to talk about the core.
Hello. Okay, for the core, we had 5 pull requests merged from 6 different authors, all names that I recognize, so thank you, everybody. We had 4 reviewers as well. We have 16 open pull requests. A couple of them are pretty old, but most of them are nice and fresh, so keep up the good work keeping up with pull requests. Issues-wise, we had 3 closed issues by 3 people and 7 opened by 6 people, so we're definitely gaining issues there. But we'll take a look at that. For a total of 321 open issues. We use milestones as a way to determine priority and whether we need to triage things. And we currently have 4 issues that are not assigned to milestones. So those are the ones that we need to take a look at and get a handle on this coming week. And I think that's it for the core.
Thanks. All right, next up is the libraries. So this is across all of the Adafruit CircuitPython libraries. So everything that starts with Adafruit _ CircuitPython _. We had 19 pull requests merged by 8 authors, including Michael Lass, and 7 reviewers. So thank you to everybody involved in that. Obviously, the more reviewers we have, the more authors we can support, and we keep seeing increased activity there, and that's really great to see. Of those pull requests merged, one was 19 days old and everything else was 5 days or less. We had 11 issues closed by 9 people and 11 open by 11 people, so we are net even with 188 open issues, and we currently have 28 open pull requests. We have 8 issues that are labeled good first issue, which is something I think I should probably put in the weeds, is a discussion about our good first issues and something that is coming up. There were no new libraries in the last 7 days, but there was a 3-page list of updated libraries, which I did not include in the notes because it was a lot of pages. So there's a link to the report if you want to go see that full list of libraries. But otherwise, that's what I have for that. So next up, I will turn it over to Melissa to talk about Blinka.
Oh, so Blinka is our CircuitPython compatibility layer for Raspberry Pi and other single-board computers. And this last week, we had two pull requests merged by 1 author and 2 reviewers. There were 2 open pull requests now, and there were 3 closed issues by 3 people and 0 open by 0 people, leaving a net of 25 open issues. There have been 2,629 PyPI downloads in the last week. We currently are supporting 52 boards. And that's it.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, next up is Hug Reports. Hug Reports is an opportunity to call people out for being awesome. It's a chance to, let folks know that you are aware of the great things they're doing, and just to provide some positive feedback. And so Hug Reports is held as a round robin, where I will start and then I will go down the list alphabetically and then loop back to the top. If you are lurking, I will skip over you. If you are text only, I will read your notes when we would normally get to you in the line alphabetically. If I skip over you and you had updates that weren't in the notes, please let me know. We try to keep the notes as updated as possible, but sometimes things get missed. Yeah, with that, I will get started. So first and foremost, I want to say thanks to FoamyGuy for doing a massive CircuitPython library release sweep. I was expecting assistance with it, not that the entire list of 100+ libraries would be released. So thank you so much for that. I went back to it and there were 2, and I know why those 2 had not been released. It made sense. So that was pretty much amazing. Thanks to Jeff for taking notes today in this meeting. Thanks to KMatch98 for all the contributions lately, especially that they seem to be going through a lot of stuff that they're learning new, or just learning as they go, and it's been great to watch. Thank you to David Glaude for providing feedback on our new French translated guide and for agreeing to assist with reviewing on upcoming translated guides. Thanks to Anne for coordinating CircuitPython day planning. Thanks to Dan and everyone involved in getting the latest release of CircuitPython out. And finally, thanks to Carter for helping me with my current guide update by discussing power requirements for everything involved. And that's me. So next up is KMatch98.
Okay, thanks, Ketney. So first off, thanks to FoamyGuy for being awesome. Particularly for all the support on display text. Hope that's wrapping up, but we'll see how things go. Scott, thank you for code reviews and teaching me things along the way. Third is to Dan H. and Summersoft for some understanding of some of the constraints with CircuitPython, particularly with a weird use case with parent overriding of classes. And thanks for letting me know what was possible and what wasn't. And I guess last, Kattni, thanks for the positive feedback. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, next up is Maker Melissa.
Hello. So I just wanted to give a hug report to Brent for your help on Adafruit IO and a group hug.
Great. All right, next up is Scott.
Hello. First and foremost, a hug report to Mr. Certainly for keeping ban and join stats for the Discord on the moderation side. As some folks know, we turned off server discovery because of the flood of spam that we were getting, and Mr. Certainly's been keeping track on the impact of that. So thank you, Mr. Certainly. Thanks to Me6 for getting up early to join my stream last week. They're in Singapore, so I think they had to set an alarm for 5 a.m. or something to watch my stream. So I appreciate that and the enthusiasm. Thank you to Knit and Code for the awesome work on Debug Edge. If you haven't seen this, we're working on hopefully adequate open spec for SWD and JTAG connections on the edge of a board that is solder free. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Thank you to Dan H for the epic BLE HCI work. I'm very excited to have generic HCI BLE HCI support so that we can have more and more boards with Bluetooth support. Thanks to COTDP and Madit Nerd for adding more ESP32S2 boards. I showed him on adding a board on my stream last week, and some folks jumped in and made some PRs. So I'm very excited to see the S2 board family grow. And you're welcome to drop screenshots, Jeff. And then lastly, hug report to Lady Ada for adding the Kaluga to CircuitPython.org. She beat me to it. So excited to see that as well.
All right, excellent. Next up is Dan.
All right, hold on, scrolling around. Okay, thanks to Scott for all the work he's been doing on ESP32S2 Wi-Fi. So he submitted a PR also, and I'm going to start reviewing that today. Thanks to Jeff for fixing various bugs and also annoyances in the build process and so forth. Whenever this comes up, he tends to submit something within a few hours, which fixes something or other. Thanks very much. Thanks to Xiang Yi for working on a bunch of NRF stuff, including and other things. He's adding reverse HID so that you could set the lights on a keyboard, and also some fixes to NRF, including even more lower power work. And then thanks to Jeff and Lucian for discovering and working on fixing a makefile issue where if you put comments on the same line as a makefile variable, then the trailing white space of the value is included in the value, which is completely awful. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Dan. Next up, David Glaude is lurking, so I will read off their notes. David says, to Arturo182 for the keyboard Featherwing, nice acquisition. To Dan H for all the BLE work and support. And to Maker Melissa and Anecdata for trying to help me with RGB Matrix and Featherwing Airlift. Next I have notes from Foamy Guy. To Foamy Guy's hug report to Jepler for finding and submitting PRs across many libraries for the new version of Pylint. To Cedar Grove Studios for submitting a detailed account and reproducer code for an issue they found with display text, and KMatch98 for checking into it. And to KMatch98 for continuing to add enhancements to Bitmap Label. Text scale and line spacing mutability was added this week. Next up is Hierophect.
Thanks this week to Dan and Scott for their hard work on the release and for helping me out with some debugging details, crash in the stack that they were helped talk about. And thanks to Jaren and Anecdata for their continued testing across the STM32 and ESP32 ports and putting in new issues for the bugs that they find. It's really useful. And that's it for me.
Excellent. Next up is Jeppler.
Hello. I also wanted to thank Ji-Yong Wei He for the work on low power on NRF. That's pretty exciting to see. I wanted to thank Scott and Brian for a conversation about the _CAN.io API that we had last week, and I think we're due to have another one this week. To Carl FK for some comments on the CAN bus support issue on GitHub, because we're trying to track what are people's use cases and try and meet those. Thanks to Dan for the release, and I'm sorry that one of my changes caused trouble. Thanks to Anne and everyone who is working on the CircuitPython Day planning, and Kattni for coming up with the idea to interview each other on CircuitPython Day. I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Next up is Jerry.
Hi. Thanks to Dan for getting the HCI BLE support into CircuitPython, into BLE.io, and for all his work on BLE in general. Looking forward to getting back to poking around at it, see what I can break. And thanks to S. McMammy in the forums. Posted had made a port of the RFM69 and RFM9X libraries over to MicroPython, and did all the heavy lifting of getting the SPI interfaces all straightened out, and had some minor issues that I helped get straightened out. So they're both actually working. It's really nice to see. And then they're now making those available on GitHub as well. A little more discussion about that later in status.
Excellent.
That was nice. Oh, shush. Sorry. Cat attack.
All right. Well, that is Hog Reports. Next up is status updates. So status updates is an opportunity to discuss what you've been doing since the last meeting and what you're going to be doing until the next meeting. It's just a way for all of us to sort of sync up on what we're up to. It's also an opportunity to give people tips and tricks if there are quick questions they have and you have an answer. It's an excellent opportunity for that discussion. This section is also held in a round robin, so it will go the same way. I will start. We'll go through the list. When there are notes from folks that are not participating in voice, I will read it. And when I get to you, you can read off your notes unless you are lurking or otherwise text only. So real quick, Charles, are you lurking for status updates as well, or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, that said, I will take a time code and get started. So last week I updated the LAS3DH and SI7021 guides with the newly released stemma versions of both of those boards. It involves going through a lot of different sections and changing up the images, changing out the pinouts, making sure the code still runs, adding new wiring diagrams, and adding resources to the downloads page. So it's relatively quick, but not super quick. And actually, I created 3 fritzing objects. I forgot we never actually updated the SI7021 fritzing object, which is what we use to create the wiring diagrams in all of our guides. So I had to quickly create that as well. Then I blogged 3 updated guides, one of which was a couple weeks ago that just got reviewed, and then the 2 I just mentioned. Started adding CircuitPython to the DRV8833 guide. It turns out we have in the stepper motor library a lot of CircuitPython code, but there's no guides that actually for stepper motors that mention CircuitPython that aren't PWM. So we wanted to, not too long ago, Carter added digital I/O support to the motor, Adafruit CircuitPython motor library for stepper motors. So you can just plug the drivers into any 4-pin, the driver board into any 4 pins and use those pins in the code. So now we wanted to update guides with these examples. So I started to update the DRV 8833 guide. I reviewed a bunch of PRs and I tested the stepper code with the Metro M4 and the Raspberry Pi for the DRV 8833, which I actually did before I started adding CircuitPython to the guide, but you know, whatever. This week, finished updating DRV 8833 guide. I actually finished that page earlier today, but the plan now is to add the TB6612, which is also a stepper motor driver, but the pinouts are slightly different, to the same page because the code is identical, and then mirror that page into the TB6612 guide so I don't have to write 2 separate pages. So that's not live yet because we're going to add a little bit more here. There's a README issue with the fingerprint library that I need to update. I will be then creating a guide for the new OLED featherwing. It's very similar to the previous OLED featherwing, except that the driver is slightly different, so we don't have CircuitPython support for it yet, but it's just twice the size, so a lot of the guide stuff will be the same as the original, but there won't be CircuitPython yet. And then I need to verify that the RGB matrix guide features the NRF properly because we created an NRF featherwing for it so that you can attach it directly to an RGB matrix. But we want to make sure that the guide got updated to include NRF references. It's lower on the priority list, but it's something we wanted to hop in there and do at some point. And then beyond that, there's plenty of other stuff. I just don't know about it yet. So that's my, and planning for CircuitPython Day. I guess I should have included that. I'm going to be running a special edition Spanish speaking show and tell at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, September 9th. And then Jeff and I will be doing, then we have the CircuitPython Weekly, and then Jeff and I will be doing the interview of each other. Then we'll be doing actual show and tell and ask an engineer. So planning for all of that will also be involved in the next week and a half. So that's where I'm at. Next up is KMatch98.
Okay, thanks, Kattni. So last week wrapped up some work on Bitmap Label, which is a way of putting text with reducing the amount of memory to use. But it had some limited features, so now it has more mutability to it, where you can change things on the fly after you've generated it. So a little bit more like the label behaves. In the process, I identified a bug in label itself, and now you can scale and it'll put it back in the placement that it belongs. Okay, as for this coming week, I started looking at one of the good first issues about adding an immediate refresh option for display. So I've been digging into that and making some notes on the issue of possible paths to do that. And as for other things, this weekend made a 2-color stencil that's printed with spray paint based on a design my daughter made, and I made 2 runs, 25 prints on that. So that was good to start and finish a project all in the same day. And then last, I'm looking at ways of making paper, but making it so you can make your own shapes. So I'm looking to 3D print a mold and decal and see if I can make that work. Okay, and that's it.
Interesting. Good luck with that. Next up is Maker Melissa.
Hello. So last week I wrote a not implemented bus.io one-wire class for Blinka. I fixed the pins for an old Raspberry Pi Model A in Blinka. I wrote a weather demo for John Park. I performed some code reviews on GitHub. I wrote an Adafruit Python shell library to help with shell to Python script conversions. I updated a couple scripts to use that library. And I made a few improvements to the matrix portal library based on some feedback I got. I wrote a quick demo using the matrix portal library for PhilB that looks up the current moon phase. I started working on the next demo for John Park that uses Adafruit IO. I added a receive all data function to the CircuitPython Adafruit IO library. I added the Kaluga and updated a bunch of other boards on circuitpython.org with images. And I did some testing on the latest Raspberry Pi OS with a Pi TFT display I had on hand. And this week, I'm going to test and wrap up some pending changes to the Matrix Portal library and get that released. I'm going to finish up writing that demo for JP. I'm going to finish working on some more shell script conversions and finish testing out some more PRs later. And that's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Melissa. Next up is Scott.
Hello. So my native Wi-Fi PR is out and waiting for review. That's kind of a giant one, so good luck to Dan. On top of that, I've been working on the requests changes I've made because I think that's what people will need in order to use the native Wi-Fi. Thanks to Kattni, I got in unit tests for the request module, which should make it easier for me to tell if I'm breaking anything, because basically I have to evolve the APIs for all of the networking stuff. And I think the way to do it is in small incremental changes. So I'm working on that. I got the Kaluga PR out. I think it might actually have been merged, but I'm behind on email. It's another dev board from Espressif, but it's got like tons of bells and whistles on it instead. So we started carrying that in the Adafruit shop this week, so it was good to get a board definition for that. Instead of, I'm trying to move myself from this like giant drop of code mentality that I've done with a native Wi-Fi PR to lots of small stuff going forwards. So I'm hoping the requests unit test is an example of that. I'll do a larger drop for HTTP 1.1 with requests as well, but I'm hoping that I'll be a bit more agile going forward in the next few weeks, especially as people find issues with ESP32S2. So I expect that'll happen. Outside of CircuitPython, Jeff was talking about Debug Edge, which is an idea that I came up with a couple other folks on Twitter, wanting a way to expose the low-level debugging pinouts in a way that doesn't cost anything on the original boards. So so I've been experimenting with that. Greg Davil gave a great pointer to some connectors that will work really well. So if you're a board designer, take a look at that. Give us feedback on the Debug Edge style. And then September's a day away, and I told myself that in September, for the first 2 weeks, I would go try to be more focused on getting electioncal.us kind of up to snuff for the US election that's in November 3rd. So there's a lot of deadlines that happen throughout late September and October. So it's I want to get SMS going and email support going and Twitter support going is my goal with that. And then I'll consider it done for this election cycle. So yeah, that's where I'm trying to do my focus, even though my brain wants to work on FPGA stuff as well. So I can always do that later. And Jeff is giving me a hug report for unit testing. I actually, the other heads up is if you're looking at libraries and they have tests, but they're not automatically run, enabling those is good too. There's a couple that I found that we had tests, but we weren't running them. I turned them on if they just worked, but there was also a couple that didn't just work. So always keep an eye out for that.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Next up is Dan.
Okay, so as we mentioned, I submitted the BLEIO HCI, a pull request, and there's a small pull request that goes with the Adafruit BLE library. And Scott reviewed that, and we discussed some changes to the API, which I've implemented. And now that's probably going to be, it'll be reviewed again soon and probably will be pulled in soon. I did the 6.0.0 alpha 3 release. which had a ton of stuff in it. It's been since July 23rd, I think, was the last time. And so there was a lot to put in there. There were some problems with the release process, but I cleaned some stuff up manually, and it's all fine now. One of the things that we do is that we have download logs of all the downloading of firmware from CircuitPython.org, and that's stored in Amazon S3. The logs are very short, like there's a few seconds or a minute each, and so there are hundreds of thousands of log files in a month, and so I downloaded them all, concatenated them, and uploaded the concatenated versions for easier processing. That I just did mostly by hand and with a little script. And we'll automate this eventually, but it was good enough for now to do it semi-manually. So on my agenda for the next week or so is to review Scott's Wi-Fi PR that he talked about. And then after both BLEIO and Wi-Fi 1 go in, we'll probably do a beta 0 release because we don't anticipate any more API changes. And with beta, we talk about things either being like API complete or feature complete or something. So we'll probably switch from alphas to betas. So maybe they'll be released this week or soon after that. One thing that is also on the plate, but maybe not immediately, is that before the HCI BLEIO, I did Blinka-based BLEIO, which sort of works, but there are problems on certain platforms, especially Mac. So I want to go back and look at that and see if it's easy to fix, or if it's not easy to fix, at least document what works and what doesn't. And finally, in the longer term, but not immediately upcoming, is that Blinka BLEIO HCI only acts as a peripheral right now. It can't do scanning, and it can't act as a central. It can't access remote characteristics. So an obvious thing to do is to finish it off to do those things. Peripheral was good enough for now for the applications we have in mind in the near term for BLEIO HCI. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
All right, excellent. Next up, I have notes from David Glaude, who is lurking. Tested my keyboard featherwing. Left shift and right shift are indistinguishable, so I may need to update the firmware. Trying to make an indoor-outdoor sensor with Adafruit CircuitPython BLE Adafruit, gave up. Putting a Feather NRF 52840 Sense into a balloon later inflated for science monitoring using web Bluetooth dashboard, summary, pressure, and humidity increase. Same balloon that changes color when squeezed. And there is a Twitter link there. And then failed to do Feather M4 Express, RGB matrix featherwing for Feather M4s, and Featherwing airlift because there are conflicting pins. Next up, I have notes for Foamy Guy. Last week, tested PR for Bitmap Label immutability. Made a pass through many libraries to create releases for the recent Pylint updates. Added Bitmap Label to JSON display library or layout library, and kicked the tires a bit by creating a multifunction timer gadget with a mini TFT featherwing. Got an overhead camera set up at my desk to start working on more video content. Next week, starting work on examples and a guide for multitasking with CircuitPython, finish up the timer gadget and record some videos showing it and the code, and then starting a series of video tutorials to teach the basics of programming with a circuit playground. Excellent. Next up is Hierophect.
All right, so this past week I spent on a bunch of different just bugs scattered across the ports. Starting off with a Meowbit display bug, which ended up bleeding into a bunch of other little hidden bugs that were in the STM32 port. And then moving on to a variety of ESP32 and STM32 bugs, including a problem that we're having on the SPI and SD card on the STM32. Reintroducing the TRNG or the ESP32 random module and adding the true random number generation to that. And then that also led to fixing a bug in the STM32's version of that module. As Dan mentioned, we fixed a makefile comment problem that when you add comments to makefiles, it was causing build flags to be unexpectedly turned off, which would make things like display IO just inexplicably like not be working. So I went and fixed that both in the code and also in the documentation, since in the porting guide, there's kind of a big template that you can copy paste when starting a port, and it had a whole bunch of comments in there that would screw you up if you actually did copy and paste it in. I found a null reference exception that pops up somewhere in ESP32 in display IO. First popped up in kind of an unrelated PR when Lady Ada was testing with it. And I've been poking at that. That one's one of the trickier ones where it's a little bit hard to track because I don't have my debugger up and running. It's got some kind of stack corruption that may not even be related to the error. It may be happening earlier. So this week, I'm going to be getting GDB up and running on the ESP32 and then trying to track down this crash since display IO is pretty common and we don't want it just blowing up all of a sudden. And then beyond that, I'm going to be working a little bit on my new F1 boards. I'm going to try and see if I can get to rotary IO on STM32 and ESP32 and kind of maybe handle those simultaneously since they're low-hanging fruit. But in general, I'm just going to be kind of on-demand debugging for the ESP32 since we've got a bunch of new stuff coming in, and if new bugs pop up, I want to be able to help out with those. So that's my priority list. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Next up is Jeff.
Hello again. Last week, I mostly spent working on the low-level CAN IO module. I still haven't transmitted or received a packet, but most of the hardware registers should now be set up properly. And then on Friday, I switched to looking at bugs in RGB matrix. This week, I hopefully will be wrapping those up early in the week. And then after that, I will return to CAN IO. But I also want to investigate a reliability problem of SDIO-IO that I encountered this weekend. I have a STM32F405 Feather. I put an SD card in it and set up a little slideshow. And multiple times per hour, it will crash with a read error or an IO error. And so the first thing to do is check if I swap in a different SD card, does the problem go away? And if it does, that card just goes in the trash and we don't talk about this again. But otherwise, maybe there's a bug, maybe there's a retry that needs to be added or something like that. And for fun stuff, like I was just mentioning, I put together a visual demo of SD card speed improvements, which I'll show on CircuitPython Day. And I also got word that my Maker Diary keyboard PCB seems to have shipped, and I'm excited to put together a third keyboard that will use CircuitPython. So lots to do.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Next up is Jerry.
Yeah, hi again. So spent a bunch of time helping with this port of the RFM699X libraries over to MicroPython. As I said before, the original poster had gotten the SPI all working, and there were just a bunch of little details in converting over the way time works, differences between CircuitPython, MicroPython. But it was really fun to see it working, and that opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities. So I'm looking forward to playing with that. If you want the original, person has created a GitHub repository, and the link is there. And then in discussion, I thought hopefully they're going to also include the RFM9X there, but there was a link to where the forum discussion was if anybody's interested in playing with those. They're still preliminary, but they work. And then along with that, I had done some size reduction work on the RFM69 library so that we could incorporate it into the RFM69 M0 build. And that work is pretty much done. It's just sort of installed pending an issue that came up with the SPI baud rate. I had to lower the baud rate to get reliable communication, and a little puzzling as to why, but it seems to work. And my thinking right now is to just go ahead and declare that done and get it merged and updated. It seems to work fine, and worry about the SPI stuff later. I'll bring that up in the weeds more. And so once that's done, I can then update the build for the RFM M0 RFM69, and that library can be frozen in. I started this morning actually playing with Dan's HCI BLE implementation that worked nicely once I used the Nina firmware that he provided in the link. It's an older build, but then, as I usually do, I tried building it myself, and if I build it locally, it doesn't work. The version 1.7.0 fails to communicate with the ESP32. So I'm not quite sure where the issue is there. So I filed an issue with that and trying to understand more about it, but it might take some help from Lenore before we get too far with that. And then I just had a question. There was some discussion in the I think it was on Discord or somewhere, maybe in GitHub. Is SPI right now broken on ESP32S2? Does anyone know?
I believe so.
Okay, then
I haven't actually tested it, but somebody else reported an error with it. So
right, I saw those
surprised.
postings. So I tried to do a quick test with some of the RFM boards, and I could not get them to work. Maybe it really is broken. Okay.
Yeah, I believe it.
All right. Thanks.
I think it might have to do with maybe it's using DMA under the hood, and we're allocating memory now on PSRAM. So one thing to try would actually be try both with the room module, which doesn't have PSRAM, and with a rover, and see if it changes between the two.
Okay, I can do that. All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. And that is status updates. So the next thing we have up is In the Weeds. In the Weeds is an opportunity for more long-form discussions, bigger questions, stuff that's going to cause a 20-minute long discussion, that sort of thing. Is good for In the Weeds. If you have any In the Weeds topics, please add them as soon as you figure them out. The idea is we don't want to sit around and wait to find out whether there are more In the Weeds topics. So I snuck mine in before Jerry's because mine won't be that long. And the thing I wanted to talk about was our Good First Issues on libraries. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is we have a script called Adabot that does everything. But one of the things that she does is adds the Hacktoberfest label to all issues labeled as a Good First Issue. For those who may or may not know, Hacktoberfest is a thing put on by DigitalOcean, I believe, and whoever else they get to sponsor every October. And they basically you register for it, and then they keep track of the PRs that you get merged during October, and as long as they're considered valid by the owner of the repo that you merge it to, in other words, if it just comes across as spam, they can report it, then it counts towards, I believe, 5 PRs that you need throughout the month of October, and then you get a really cool t-shirt. Or this year they're doing a thing where you can also have them plant a tree for you. Not gonna lie, the t-shirts are really great. So, do what you want, but just letting you know that's 2 very excellent things you have to choose between. So, what I wanted to talk about was getting people involved in making sure that we have issues that are tagged Good First Issue as we head into October. If you create an issue and it's a Good First Issue, either add the label yourself or let us know. Like, if you are unable to add the label, I don't know whether you need permissions to do that or not. Let us know so we can get that added. A while ago, I would have said we should go through the library infrastructure issues on circuitpython.org/contributing, but most of those have actually been worked through, and most of what's on there you have to be either have permissions or be a member of the Adafruit org to deal with. So that is not a super it's not a great resource for us to come up with good first issues at the moment, because we kind of did all of them, I guess is my point. So anyway, if you file an issue or you come up with an issue to file on a library or on the core, and you think it's a good first issue, then make sure that label gets added there. And if you need to ping one of us to do it, feel free. You can either find us on Discord, or you can just directly ping us in the issue that you create and say, hey, you know, this is a good first issue, I think. Can you please add the label? And we'll get that done. And what we want to be aware of is throughout, we've attracted a lot of new people through Hacktoberfest. So there's going to be an influx of new folks who may need assistance with Git and GitHub. We have a guide for that, which is a little out of date, but kind of gives the gist. We have our own knowledge to share, and they may need help with the particular issue. So if it's a library you've worked on, you know, and you have the cycles to help them out, keep that in mind as an option. Basically, we're a very welcoming and positive community, so just keep that up. There's not a lot of changes needed to be made there, but be aware that we're going to bring in new folks of all levels, not just new people, but like new people new to programming, but also people who are, you know, very fluent programmers who want to take on more complicated issues, and they may need assistance with that, and so on and so forth. So all of that said, please be more mindful of labeling things good first issue if they are good first issues as we're heading into October. So throughout September, let's try and do that as much as possible. I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that.
The one thing I was going to say is, if you're like me and you collect Discord servers, there is a Discord server for Hacktoberfest this year.
Yes.
I have not seen anything useful on it, but there is one.
Yeah, I think they sort of have plans for helping people out to get started and that kind of thing on there. But they're also pushing Preptember, which is you then go, you know, you can scour the, you know, depths of GitHub to find projects you want to contribute to in September, so that when October hits, you can dive right in. But that's not something that obviously we need to do. We already have a project. It's just that we will have people coming into our project. So yeah, the Discord server may end up being more useful as we get closer to it. But it's definitely an option. So that's all I've got there. If you need any help with knowing whether an issue is a good first issue, please ping me, that kind of thing. Good for discussion. And the other thing is, when you file those issues, make sure they're very clear and precise. It could be the best good first issue ever, but if the issue that is filed is not clear or doesn't really explain what needs to be done, it's not going to help the person who is picking it up or trying to do it. So, and that really should be the case for all issues, but specifically for issues you're creating that you're intending for a good first issue, make sure that you clearly explain what is meant to be done and what the scope is. And that way we give people a better experience. So, all right. Totally forgot to take a time code. I will take one for Jerry. Next up, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry for SPY issues.
Okay, thanks. And this is maybe one of the issues that may be a non-issue and may just be the way life is. But I've noticed this before, especially on the Raspberry Pi. But now I've been playing with SPI quite a bit more in trying to debug things on the RFM boards, and I've noticed that the SPI transactions really have these big delays, which seem unnecessary. I don't know why it takes so long. And in the typical way it's set up is that you wrap the SPI transaction in this, you know, where you, as the little piece of code snippet in the document shows, that you do a with self device as device, and then you make the calls to the SPI core routines. And if you look at the the logic analyzer thing below, the bottom two traces, the bottommost trace is wrapping outside of that whole loop. So it's taking how long it takes from the time you start that with self.device to when it finishes the whole thing. And then the one above that is just wrapping the two writes. So you can see that the actual write operations don't take very long, but there's this huge delay in getting configured. And you do this every time. So if you're polling an SPI register, for instance, it spends an awful lot of time just sitting there waiting for this stuff. So my question is that unavoidable? Is it just the way life is in the way Python is set up? And is it a problem? Does anybody really care? As an example, if I do this under Arduino and I look at the way Arduino handles these boards, those delays are in microseconds, not milliseconds. That delay is almost a millisecond long on an M0.
I think you're just seeing how slow CircuitPython is.
Okay.
Like this is on an M0. So one thing I think that would be interesting for you to do is just do it on an M4.
Oh, I did, and it's about 4 times as fast. Yeah,
which is about right?
Yeah, it's just about right. And I did it on an STM32, and it's about the same as the M4.
Okay.
I think. So it strictly is just the code it's executing to do this.
Yeah. I think it's just like it's the cost of running something with Python. Now, I don't think it's that huge of a problem because for long transactions, it's like a fixed cost per transaction.
Right.
There was we had a bug ages ago where configure would always reconfigure and it didn't short circuit if you were configuring to the same thing. That's one thing to be aware of. And then the other thing is I think like bus device has been super stable. So one thing we could look into is actually re-implementing bus device in C rather than Python. And I think that would make this a bit quicker as well.
Okay.
So although there's not that much Python logic in it.
Right.
So
yeah, bus device really doesn't have much in it at all. Yeah.
So yeah, but it could impact it. Like it's something we could try is making bus device built in because it is so core to a lot of our drivers.
Okay. Well, good. I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't something that caught any, that was a big concern. It just seemed odd. And I think in some applications, particularly so it's not causing. I don't think it's really causing any big issues, but it does really slow down polling for things. So you look at it's like in the RFM, what you do is you're polling essentially instead of an interrupt, you're polling for a flag, and it can, that millisecond can be a long time.
Does it have an interrupt line that you could pull?
Yeah. That's what I am polling.
No, like a separate wire out of the device.
Oh, that's an idea.
Because pulling, using a digital I/O to pull the state of a pin will be.
That's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Yes, there is a digital I/O. Well, maybe. Let me look into that.
The interesting thing is, that's exactly what I do with the MCP 23017 parallel I/O.
Right.
It made a big difference because originally I was trying to poll it with I2C and it was and then when I went to the separate, it's separate automatically. There are actually separate lines that you can put into an I/O into a pin. Pins or pins.
No,
and I assume you could do that.
That makes a lot of sense. I will look into that. There are lines that come out and they are configurable as to how they interrupt. So yeah. One other question I had quickly while I had this shot up there. On the up three lines, you're seeing Miso and Mosi, and you can see this little delay. And I think this is the same example. But one thing I noticed is that if you're in the
Which
code.
delay? Which delay?
Well, in between, there's a little blast of writes, and then there's a little gap, and then it finishes off with a little more writes at the end.
Yep.
In that top trace, you see there's a very short little activity, and then a broader one, and then a gap, and then another small activity.
Right.
And what that is I'm writing a 5-byte message out to a FIFO. And what it does is it writes the first 4 bytes, and then it takes a little break. And then it writes the last 2. So it must be a 6-byte message. And I know that if you look in the code, there's a breakpoint. If there's more than 16, it uses DMA.
Right.
For 16 bytes. If it's less than 16, it doesn't use DMA. So is that little gap, what happens is the clock stops, and it just sort of takes a little break in transmitting. It's in the middle of the transfer, but it just sort of takes a little break. Is that, any idea why that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that it's the time it takes for the code to read it.
Oh, it has to go back and read another word.
Right. So you write a word,
Yeah.
you're in a busy loop, but that busy loop is also probably running the background tasks. And so
at this time, I mean, I've just done a it's in the SPI transfer. So I've turned all I've done is said go transfer, these 6 bytes. And
right.
Okay. So it's probably
the reason that there is that gap is that it's assumed that there's a cost to starting the DMA up, right? Because you have to do there's copy bookkeeping sorts of things that you have to do it. So that's why there's a check of at some point it's not worth it. So
right. I just noticed this the other day that gap was even there. I guess I should try writing 6 bytes, 7 bytes, 8 bytes. I assume there'd be a gap every 4 bytes. Would be my guess.
That would be my assumption, until you get to DMA. But even DMA is still best effort, right? Because you're still sharing a memory bus.
Okay. Well, I think so. For now, this all looks normal, and I'm going to sort of back burner this problem or ignore it. I'll work on changing the code to use the interrupts as a next big improvement. But I think I'll go ahead now and try and get everything released and updated. We can move on.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised that last burst is not the read into. Right, I guess you're writing one thing and then you're reading a bunch.
Yeah, in this case, you're right. You do a write to you write the register you want to read from.
Yep.
And then you read all the rest. So I think that first little blip is the write, and then the rest are all reads. But it's reading. No, actually, this is going the other way. So this is actually this example. I'm sorry, it may have been a slightly different example. Was a write. I was writing a message out.
Okay, because I would expect a gap
on the read into
it's
clean. On the read into it doesn't do this. You're right. It does all of them without a break. When you read it seems to capture them all much more quickly. But they're and it might be some. Well, I don't know. Could be something in the radio side too, where when you're writing to the FIFO, it's different than reading from it. I don't know.
Yeah. Jeff asked a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to understand it.
So I was just looking at the code. So the way it checks whether the registers of the CirCom are unchanged is with this block of code. And I had 2 questions about that. And one is querying the hardware registers, like with HRI, CirCom SPI, get Ctrl-A, CPHA bit. Is that just as fast as reading it out of the SPI structure that we keep? Is reading a hardware register as fast as reading from RAM? Or should we track those flags ourselves? And then the second thing was I noticed that the SPI baud rate to baud rate register value is using floating point math. And so that might be slow, particularly on the 21s without floating point support.
Right.
I think that's pretty fast to read those registers. So, and the HRIA routines they tend to be inline code. There are only a few instructions each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So But I guess you could try and check just whether that is effective. If you had a debugger, you could check whether you reach the block of code after that return true a lot or just once when you're setting up your program.
One thing we could do is we could move the value computation after the first 3 checks. But I guess that doesn't help you.
That doesn't help in the common case. In the case you hope is common, where it's always the same.
Right.
We can move the computation of it to where we know we need to set it. So store the baud, compare the baud to the configured baud, and then only if it's different do you compute the register value. If that turned out to be the slow part, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's floating point math, but it's just one division, and some other. It's trying to round it to the correct value, and that's down in the peripheral submodule if you're looking for it.
It seems so unlikely. There's so much other code going on to execute the actual Python code. I think it's kind of in the noise.
I think you're probably right.
Because there's so much else going on inside the virtual machine and other things getting called.
Yeah.
Just
on the Raspberry Pi, this actually is somewhat of a problem. I mean, these delays can be several milliseconds.
Well, that's because it's not real time.
Right. Yeah. So there we ran into it's but decided that was not a problem worth tackling.
Is your line labeled enable? That's the chip select line, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not even.
Yes, it takes a long time to get to chip select.
Right. The bus device sets the chip select value to false after it configures the SPI bus. So the part that I was talking about of reconfiguring it would come before that falling edge, not after it.
Right.
I mean, I think maybe it makes sense, yes, to cache the computation of the baud register.
I don't know if it'll make a difference or not.
I mean, considering that it's about 4 times faster on the SAMD51, which has floating point, so yeah. I mean, I think like it would be interesting if you just commented out the actual SPI operations and just saw how long it took to go in and out of what would have been an SPI operation. That will tell you how much overhead there is for that.
That comes from the Python? That comes from
the configuration? So you write a bus device that doesn't actually do anything. Okay, and then see how long it takes to call that. So that would be an easy test. To do everything but the actual SPI operation, and then see how much overhead is there in when you end up calling bus.io.spi something or other.
The bus.io does the initialization of SPI, right? The SPI bus, and once you got that number, couldn't you put it away? For
yeah, but I think what I'm saying is that the C code that's called for for the SPI reads or writes, like just skip that and see how much the overhead of everything else is.
Right.
In the example, that would be
there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's dinit, you're checking for dinit, and there's checking for the locks, and there's a lot of stuff.
yeah. So I think it's probably all the Python code, and but that's an easy. You can, instead of speculating, that's an easy thing. You can just subtract all that out, okay? Or you can figure out what the overhead of the Python is, and before you end up calling the SPI actual native SPI operation.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's all good stuff to do before we start tearing the whole system apart. But I also think that at this point too, it's pretty clear it's not a problem in the RFM driver. We'll move on.
And I think and if you have a flag that says, if there's a pin that says there's data, you don't have to keep querying the module over and over. So
I would like
better for the module too. So yeah,
I have found that, and the reason I had to start adjusting the baud rates is that there are some really funny little things that happen, and I cannot get a good picture of it. That if I go too fast, if I go back up to 5 megahertz, occasionally somewhere some values, some MSBs get shifted around. They get lost or things, but it's not as clear as I'd hoped it would be. In other words, when I captured the transaction and captured it occurring, but I can't see it on the Salier. It didn't show me. It wasn't. I didn't understand what I was seeing. So there's a lot more to play with in understanding that. But for now, I found the 2 megahertz was a good blend. If I go down to 1 megahertz, it causes problems on the other side. If I go to 5, it seems to be too fast. Causes some occasional problems, but 2 seems to be a sweet spot. I don't know. Lots to play with.
There is one optimization we could play with that Damien mentioned to me, but basically because we're on PyStack now, there is another option that I don't remember what it's called, but it basically right now when you call a Python function, it still kind of like calls the VM again and creates a stack frame on the C stack, but you don't actually need to do that if you have a separate Python stack anymore. And so I think there's a separate config to basically say like don't use the C stack when calling another Python function, because it can just use the PyStack on its own. So that might actually speed up the VM like on the whole as well. But I think Damon may have mentioned that it might take more code space. I don't know.
There's no free lunch.
It's a lead. Yeah.
Where would I look for that? Where is that configuration set?
It's it's some MicroPython MicroPy underscore something.
Okay.
Probably like related to changes with PyStack, but I don't remember its name. I could probably look and maybe see it, but
okay, that's fine. It's something to
yeah,
do
it was like something on my radar, but
right.
Performance is not the only thing we care about.
Yep.
MicroPy stackless. Avoid using CStack when making Python function calls.
Right.
CStack still may be used if there's no free heap, so we can turn that on.
Yeah.
The MicroPy stackless strict. I'm looking at mpconfig.h and mpconfig.h.
Yeah, that sounds suspect.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Which I think, yeah, and I think it becomes more and more important as we get multiple memory hierarchies, especially on the S2. Keeping stuff in the onboard RAM is going to be better than the PS RAM.
All right. Well, thanks. This helps.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it's slow.
All right. I think with that, we're going to wrap up. This has been the CircuitPython Weekly for August 31st, 2020. Thank you to everyone who participated, either in the chat or by adding notes for us to read off. If you want to support Adafruit and CircuitPython, and those of us that work on CircuitPython, considering purchasing stuff from the Adafruit shop at adafruit.com. The video of this meeting will be released on YouTube at youtube.com/Adafruit, and the podcast will be available on major podcast services. It will also be featured in the Python for Microcontrollers newsletter, so visit adafruitdaily.com to subscribe to that. The next meeting has been moved. It will be held on September 9th, 2020 at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. So the same time we hold it on Mondays, but it will be on Wednesday. This meeting is held on the Adafruit Discord, which you can join at any time by going to adafru.it/discord. To be notified about meeting changes or any changes to the time or day, you can ask to be added to the CircuitPythonistas role on Discord. As well, if you want to participate in the meeting and actually chat to speak, you need to be in the CircuitPythonistas role for that as well. So if you want to join us and you want to be able to talk through your notes, let us know and we'll add you to that role. And with that, we hope to see you all next week on Wednesday. And I want to say thanks to everybody again for participating, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks again for a wonderful meeting.